All right, guys, we're going to get started again. Next up, we've got Jarno Niemelä, and he's going to go through the effectiveness of hardening mitigations against exploits that were used in APTs.
Okay, thank you. So basically, of course, first I want to lay the groundwork on why I did this research. The whole point is that for corporates, applying hardening is expensive. You don't do system configurations unless there's a good reason to do so, and whatever extra chief of security will ask from IT staff will most likely be told, no, we're not going to do it because it costs money. So I wanted to give a decision support tools to base that why this should be done, why some particle operations should be done, and just how effective it is. So in this research we evaluated popular hardening methods. Everything is already known, so there's no rocket science here, just a good explanation on why these things should be done and just how effective they are. And of course, as attacks and defenses evolve constantly, we are trying to evaluate here the effectiveness of different styles of approach rather than just on what tools should be used, because tools change all the time. But anyway, for the tests we used publicly available tools, so the methods that we are using here can be directly applied to corporate environments. But then again, also treat these as recommendations more for the different styles of approach rather than just individual tools. So for the exploits that we used in the test, we used a bit less than 1,000 confirmed exploit document samples, and they have been in the wild between 2010 to 2013. Also, in addition of that, we used only documents available from VirusTotal or other public sources so that I could release this research, which limited our set a bit, but still I think that it is comprehensive enough to be useful. So in here you can see the time distribution and the number distribution over the time, so there's basically pretty widespread of almost all of my testing region. And we identified the documents by the CVE numbers. The identification was done by using scan engines, which means that it's not accurate identification, and there are going to be misclassifications that some CVE is actually a different exploit than what my numbering is claiming. But then again, that doesn't really matter. They are all valid exploits, and they all have been verified to be hostile documents. And most of the exploits that we have seen have a short lifespan in active use. With a couple exceptions, they are being used only for a short while for APT attacks. And then how I can identify that something is an APT? So what we did was that we identified the documents by their context and deciphered that, okay, this kind of it might be interest of business, this kind of interest for military, political, etc. So we couldn't know who the victims were with 100% accuracy, but judging from the content, we get a pretty good view. So basically, we had press events, conference proceedings, diplomatic and political reports and analysis, human rights activism reports, articles, military reports, event analysis. And one very interesting thing about military documents was that one of the most common way of attacking military personnel is not actually direct military material. It's tax reports, personal finances, veterans' benefits, and everything else which obviously is of a personal interest for people working on governmental and military sectors. And then, of course, your standard business-related mails, curriculum vitae, etc. But since I don't know whether those were stolen from real persons, I couldn't add any here as screenshots. So the analysis method we used was that we tested the samples with Windows XP Service Pack 3, with Adobe Acrobat 8 and Flash Player 6 and Office 2003. So all of these software versions are ancient and obsolete, and I hope that nobody is using them anymore, at least not with the latest patches. But in order to enable as many exploits as possible, we chose a very vulnerable base platform. So I wanted only to test the additional mitigations, not the basic system configuration. But the mitigations that we are using are just as valid with Windows 7 and Windows 8 and the latest versions of Office and other software, although some of them are already built in, especially for the Office pack, but not necessarily enabled. And in order to check for the exploit success, we used automatic forensics check for checking. So we built a virtual environment where we executed the samples and then we did an automatic forensics for them. First, we run the whole set against the completely unpatched, unhardened system to verify that every single exploit was working consistently. So we didn't rely on scan results telling that something is an exploit. We verified that it is doing malicious behavior. And most importantly, it does it time after time in order to be able to, in order not to skew our numbers. So mostly we look for network communication, process creation, file creation, etc. So surefire ways. Well, your Word should not be creating an exe that is making a connection to some command and control center. So that's a surefire way of saying that there's something wrong. And then after that, we started to test our protection methods. So we used application memory hardening mitigations, application sandboxing, hardening the settings of the individual applications themselves, and then hardening the operating system itself. So basic approaches that are recommended on many different hardening guides. But we wanted to give proof how effective they are. So the first method that we were analyzing is application sandboxing. And of course nowadays, Chrome, Acrobat, Office all have some form of sandboxing protection built in. So why on earth I'm studying whether sandboxing is effective? The software is doing it already. Unfortunate fact is that when you have an application that is using sandboxing by default, in order to exploit, attacker needs to find a way around that. It means that you might have less exploit for that particular software version. But anything that is going to be used for an attack will go straight past the sandbox, because otherwise there will be no attack in the first place. So while Google Sandbox is great, it doesn't really provide you and protection against APT, because the attacker has to circumvent that. Otherwise he's not going to use that as an attack vector. And that means that we wanted to test the exploits against unexpected sandboxing. So something that is not in the normal base system with certain software version. And for this test, in order that to be publicly available for you, we use Sandboxing 3.76 Pro with an additional configurations to make it as strict as possible. So own sandbox for each document type, and file execution denied for all sandboxes, no file access for the sandboxes that are not supposed to write any files like Adobe Acrobat, and for the applications that are supposed to write files, the locations where they can write files is strictly limited. So the applications were very tightly limited, and some of them obviously had to be able to write the file systems, for example, in order to otherwise user couldn't save any documents. So we had to allow that. But we had only specific locations where users can save documents, so very tightly controlled environment. And then the other second thing that we tried was hardened security settings for client applications. So when you look at advisories about vulnerabilities, especially from Microsoft, whose advisories are wonderful, they very often include mitigation instructions, what you can do until the patch is available. Okay, that's a very good info. We wanted to try how effective those methods are in general. So what happens if I mitigate already before there is any kind of intruder day exploit going around there? First of all, who on earth needs a Flash content in a PDF file? Acrobat supports Flash player and media player in PDF files. Why on earth? I haven't seen that ever in clean use, and I did try the search. So the changes we did for the Office software was that we installed Office File Validation Pack, installed the Moise Office Isolation, set the macro security level high, and disabled trust on add-ons and templates. So these settings are specific for 2003. Later I will go through what are exact settings you should use the Office 2012 or whatever is the latest version I have installed on my system. And then for the Acrobat, we disabled opening non-PDF attachments, trusted multimedia components, disabled multimedia player JavaScript, made it to be a document reader instead of an entertainment console. Nobody's using those features anyway. And actually interesting, after 2 weeks, I sent my final version of the paper here, the virus bulletin. NSA came up with their own Acrobat guidelines, which were pretty much on the same conclusions. I think it most likely is several months thinking alike than anything else, but you never know. If they were reading what I submitted, they are fast writers, I have to say. So, and then the third method I used is hardened system access policies. So I've been doing this hardening research already previously. On T2 conference on 2011, we announced the research pointing that hardening breaks malware. So APTs are quite different than your typical malware. And a lot of corporate environments are going to be hardened already. So we wanted to test the samples against your common system hardenings, so the kind of things that administrators have been told to do for the past 10 years. I wanted to see, are these effective at all against AP attacks? I knew that at least on the malware set of 2011, these killed very significant portion of active malware back on those days. But is it any good right now? Well, we'll find out. And then the last method we tested was application memory handling mitigations. So in here, we are going after monitoring the application memory behavior and trying to prevent kinds of things that clean applications don't do in the first place, and trying to detect the very interesting looking memory behavior, what happens when you are being hit by a heap spray or an exploit that's using return-oriented programming or anything else that, well, it really is not part of normal memory behavior. Then that means that when you're using these mitigations, normal apps are mostly unhindered, while exploits should fail to work. In order to test this, we found out that the only publicly available tool providing these capabilities is Microsoft Emmet. So we used that. We could have done our custom tools, but then it wouldn't be much of use for you guys. So we tried an Emmet which contains allocation mitigations, so structured exception handle override protection, heap spray protection, address space randomization, null page allocation protection, code execution or loading modification mitigations, and hooking preventions. So basically restricting heavily what applications can do, but the good news is that normal Office applications and PDF readers are not supposed to do anything like that in the first place. And then for the research, we used Emmet 4.0 beta, which was the latest available. I could have used ancient version of Emmet, but that kind of doesn't make sense. So I have a feeling that I was favoring Emmet heavily here, because this is like using an latest up-to-date antivirus against old malware. So, but then again, when you are dealing with the test where you're testing samples over a large time span, you got to do something. So most likely I'm favoring Microsoft heavily here, but the results will speak for themselves. So what were the results then for the application sandboxing? Unfortunately, for some reason, the sandboxing interfered with our automatic forensics, so we could not get conclusive results. The samples where we got conclusive results were of 452 of the full set, where the protection level was 100%, so pretty good. In order to get some kind of a feel for the rest, we manually analyzed 60 random samples, and all of those had 100% protection. But since this is only a single tool, and I was going more on whether this approach is effective or not, we didn't go further there, so we can say that it seems to be effective, but cannot say conclusively. So most typical results of sandboxing was that the exploit which had built-in payloads were able to write those payloads to the disk, just like a sandboxing system is supposed to allow. But since we had prevented execution, or execution failed on every single case. So we had infected file on the sandbox, but it remained inert all the time. It couldn't do anything evil even without within the sandbox. Pretty good. And then the samples that were relying on downloading the dropped components from external sources were not able to do network access. So on the cases where we were able to verify, it worked like it was supposed to. In theory, the application was exploited, but the exploit was useless for attacker because the drop payload was not able to do anything. And in those cases where the exploit was residing completely within the scope of the original application, even in there, it could not do anything. So it didn't have write access to interesting locations, and it could not connect to a command and control center. So, well done. However, what I can say about sandboxing is that you cannot force blocking. So it always asks this kind of a dialogue where user can allow the operation, which kind of means that this particular tool is not good for corporate environment, but then there's plenty of different sandboxing solutions available, and Windows 8 actually has a nice built-in sandboxing capabilities, which you also can use. So unexpected sandboxing is effective, provided that your attacker doesn't know that you're already doing sandboxing, and then he will try to attack this. So all this relies on is that the attacker doesn't have a good intel on what kind of mitigations you are using. But that's the unfortunate thing with mitigations. It's always a bit security through obscurity. Then for the client applications, the total protection was around 80%, which is pretty good. So there were a couple exploits that we were not able completely to mitigate with our methods. And first of those was CVE 2010-0188, which is a TIFF image format vulnerability used used exclusively on Adobe Acrobat PDF reader. The mitigation that worked on most of these exploits seen here. So we were able to stop majority, but some of those got through, was because almost all exploits in Adobe Acrobat need JavaScript in order to function. But some of the attackers are skilled enough so that they don't need the JavaScript component in the exploit, and thus they were able to take over the system. The second one was sorry, I have a typo here. It's actually a 2010-333, which is an RTF parsing vulnerability. So you notice that I have the same CVE in two of these. I have to provide an updated version of the slides to virus bulletin. So, and this is RTF parsing vulnerability. And my mistake was that the MOIS did not, by default, isolate RTF files, and I hadn't added that either. So if I would have been isolating RTF files, then this would have been working beautifully. And the last one was CVE 2012-0158, which also failed due due to not isolating RTF files. So if I would have been also thinking of an RTF files as an attack vector, which is bloody obvious, so it was totally my mistake, this method would have been close to 95% or above 95% effective. So altogether, hardening your client application settings for things that your users don't need in the first place is really effective. Then, of course, in Office 2003, the file validation and MOIS are built in, but you have to do certain settings in order to enable them. So the slides will be delivered, so the settings will be visible there. And for the Adobe Acrobat, all the recommendations still apply. So basically, the settings are named a bit differently on the latest versions, but the principles exist there. Kill JavaScript, kill all media files, kill all trust relationships, don't have any kind of trusted documents, don't have trusted connections, and Adobe Acrobat is very difficult to exploit successfully. Then for the system access policies, I have to say that this was pretty much complete failure. Total protection using my hardenings was 10% effective, which kind of stands to a reason. A lot of corporate environments are already hardened, and attackers know that, and they take that into account in their attacks. 7% were partially mitigated so that the network connection was not available or the process creation failed. But altogether, it was not what I was looking for. So in total, the system hardening approach is ineffective because everybody's doing that. So the attackers are taking that into account. And then the memory handling mitigations. This was pretty good. Emmet was able to stop every single exploit from successfully operating. Of course, as I mentioned, the Emmet 4.0b is newer than the samples I used, so the results can be skewed. And also, since for the practical reasons I limited my approach for the document-based exploits, because it's very hard to replicate watering holes effectively in a lab environment. This means that it is already known that Emmet is not effective against every single Java exploit, because many Java exploits don't do any kind of an out of the ordinary memory behavior, and that's why it is not effective against every single type of exploit. Whenever there's some funny memory behavior, Emmet is effective, but don't take this as saying that it stops 100% of all exploits everywhere. It is just very good on the kind of exploit that it can technically handle. There are claims that Emmet can be circumvented even on the ones where the exploits include memory behavior, but as you can see, I didn't find a single working example from our sample collection. So, Emmet is really good. But that's not all. In addition of just the 4 methods that we tested, there are some additional recommendations that I would do. And there's an animation mistake there. So the first thing you need to do is that when the attackers get in, they get into some random machine where somebody happened to open an exploit or happened to visit a watering hole and in order to get owned. And in order for attackers to get something of value, they need to move laterally within your network. And in order to prevent that, you want to isolate everything in your corporate network. Every single computer should be isolated. No inbound connections to clients and no outbound from the server. The attacker's favorite way of nowadays moving around in corporate environment is really simple. They either keylog or crack the user's password where they have been able to get into the systems, and then they simply use that to do remote logins to other machines. Just about every corporate IT nowadays is using remote connections in order to fix users' problems. Several times when I have some problem with my computer that require IT help, they never walk into the place. They use remote connections. Which means that your typical corporate network is allowing remote connections using one protocol or another. Whatever, good. Just make sure that those connections can only be initiated from the IT staff machines and not from one accounting secretary's machines into somewhere else in your computer, into somewhere else in your network. Isolate the network. And also have the domain accounts configured so that the users can log in only to their own workstations and maybe loaner workstations provided by IT. Don't allow random user to log in to somebody else's computer. Really simple things, but almost nobody does that. And also isolate your email to approved business use only, so allow email only from company mail server and don't allow mail sending without user authentication. And one of my favorites is controlling the DNS resolution so that you do not allow unknown domains to resolve. Most of the command and control infrastructures used by APT attacks are domain name based. There are some that uses Twitter, downloading files so from ImageUR and then using the file metadata as a control, but most still use domains. So, build a domain whitelisting system where you allow your normal domains, maybe everything in Alexa top 1 million, but anything outside of that shouldn't be allowed. Use a landing pages, just like hotels do. You try to go somewhere and you get a landing page, just like the telecom Wi-Fi network here. You can use that to your advantage, and it will be much more difficult for the attacker to communicate outside. Of course, really resourceful attackers can obtain something from known clean domains, but that already is cutting a lot of your enemy out. And also make your data difficult to steal. So use DRM to make stolen documents worthless. Windows has a little used feature called Rights Management Server, which provides transparent crypto for documents. So valid users can read documents as long as they have access to Rights Management Server, but as soon as the files are stolen, they are totally worthless. Also, watermark your company browsers for your intra-network so that you can see that it's your IT-provided, IT-approved browser that is accessing your internal network. Of course, faking that watermark is ridiculously easy, but you have to know it that it's there, and then you have to be able to get it 100% right, which means your attackers is going to probe around and you're going to get alarmed. And also, use token-based email certificates and crypto for all internal mail, smart cards or something else, so that user cannot read his emails until his token is plugged into machines. Of course, that means that users are going to plug their tokens in all the time, but still it's going to be a lot more difficult for an attacker because he needs to communicate with the token and either be able to steal the key from there or be able have to decrypt every single file that it's stealing, which is completely different than just yanking out the Outlook inbox file or the Outlook PST file and get all the email there. Which means that you have more time to detect and react. So, that's all. So, with the exception of OS hardening, these methods were effective. Very few attackers aim at anything but default configuration. And which methods to use depends on your corporate IT, but at least now I have some weapons for you for talking into your own IT department. And as a rule of thumb, all applications that deal with external data should be hardened. Personally, I would recommend a combination of hardening application settings and Emmet. Sandboxing is also effective, but can be difficult to make transparent for users. And no single layer alone is enough. Our antivirus is very good at exploit detection, both on the behavior side and using static analysis tools. But we cannot cover everything, and that's why I did this research to provide additional tools and helps. So, if anybody has questions, I will be more than happy to answer.
I think we're actually at time, but Jarno, that was a fantastic presentation. And if you guys want to come up and ask questions after the talk, please feel free to walk up. Great data.
Yeah,
Really
thank you.
actionable.